Global influence is no longer exercised solely through embassies and national governments. It is increasingly shaped by how regions compete, collaborate, and position themselves in a rapidly shifting economic landscape. As supply chains realign, strategic industries reemerge, and investment flows become more selective, the line between diplomacy and economic development continues to blur. What does it mean to operate at that intersection, where global strategy meets local execution, and where decisions made across borders ultimately determine jobs, growth, and long-term resilience at home? Welcome to Brungart Law's Lanyard, where we provide a little extra perspective through conversations with individuals from across the spectrum of society. I'm Maurice Brungart, your host. I enjoy engaging with experienced, knowledgeable, and passionate people for the opportunity it affords to enrich our understanding of the world through their eyes. The more we learn, the more likely we can become better versions of ourselves and guide others towards the same. Today's guest is Mark Wells. He was a career member of the U.S. Senior Foreign Service, where he previously served as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs and held senior diplomatic postings across Latin America and the Middle East, including as Deputy Chief of Mission in Colombia and Peru. Mark is now Director of Global Trade and Investment at the Oklahoma Department of Commerce, where he leads efforts to attract foreign investment and expand the state's international economic footprint. Welcome to the program, Mark.
Thank you very much for having me, Maurice.
Well, you were Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, Western Hemisphere Department of State, a very prestigious and responsible position. And now you ended up in the Dust Bowl of America. Explain to our audience how that happened.
Yeah, right. The PDAS or Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary role certainly has a lot of syllables in it. I think the more syllables you get, the more of the difficult work that you have to do in one of those organizations. I was essentially I would describe myself to outsiders as a type of chief operating officer of a bureau that managed 52 posts and consulates in the Western Hemisphere, as well as, let's call it 350 employees domestically. So managing not only helping with the policy team, but also managing the administrative and executive team. So there's a lot of responsibility, a lot of mentoring and senior recruitment leadership for the sections, the deputy chiefs of missions, and the chiefs of mission. So your reference to the Dust Bowl is pretty historic. I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, is my hometown. We were not part of the Dust Bowl. That is on the western side of the state. And it is kind of important because Oklahoma has two big cities and lots of rural areas that where we have agriculture and whatnot. And so the history of Tulsa is a bit famous as the oil capital of the world in the early 1900s into the 1920s. So we've got the most modern or the most representative Art Deco architecture in our downtown, but also the scene of a pretty horrific race massacre. I'm actually speaking to you today from a tech hub that has been built in the area in a renovated arts district that does celebrate and commemorate what happened here, but also looks forward to a future filled with technology as well as thinking about all of the social issues, not only with Black Americans, but also with the First Americans or the Indian tribes that are a really important part of our society here. So it is a great transition. I feel like I'm taking all of my skill set from that I learned over 30 years in Washington and coming back to my hometown and my home state and being able to apply those skills to what's next here for Oklahoma.
Well, we have a few things in common. My father was born and raised partially in Oklahoma, in a small town called Maysville, which is near Lindsay, and then that's a little near Norman and whatnot. His parents sent him down, to New Orleans to obtain a Catholic high school education at Holy Cross High School. And also, in terms of some commonalities, he went to University of Texas for his graduate studies to pursue specialty in Latin American history. and he became ultimately a professor in Latin American affairs and a Colombianist. So there's a certain similarity here. You're from Oklahoma. My dad is. You were responsible for foreign policy with Latin America and other areas in the Western Hemisphere, and that was also his expertise. So, and how did you transition out of Oklahoma, or what sparked your interest growing up to then seek out a career with the Foreign Service?
Well, that is it's an interesting question. I have an older brother who left early on. He's older than I am. He started a career in Washington and around the world. I wanted to pursue that. I felt though that I graduated from Oral Roberts University, which is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's an evangelical college here. And they had a government program there. I took the government major and then decided somebody gave me a piece of advice. If you want to work in Washington, you have to be in Washington. So my wife and I packed up the everything we owned in a small U-Haul and with $600, and we moved to Washington, D.C. And I went to George Washington University. And there, over the next 2 years, I got a degree in international relations with an emphasis on economics, international economics, Latin America policy, and national security policy. During the summer between those 2 years of study, I got an internship on the Mexico desk. This would be 1994. And while I was there for that 10-week internship, I got hired by an ambassador who was just assigned to work on this new idea of Bill Clinton's called the Summit of the Americas. And this was Bill Clinton's reset with the region to try to start a new era in U.S. Latin America relations. Just incidentally, this ambassador looked at my very, very thin resume. I did not go beyond one page, but he saw the Oral Roberts at the bottom and he said, "Oh, you're from Tulsa. I was born in Tulsa." And it was a pretty neat moment. We went on to become pretty close. He was a great mentor of mine, and I ultimately was sent by the State Department to deliver his eulogy in Tulsa about 15 years later. So you get great relationships around this type of work. So I essentially started as a civil servant on the Summit of the Americas process and was there for 4 years.
Did you have any international experience, even if it was just traveling before you joined the Foreign Service?
Very little coming out of Oklahoma, but I will say that the Oral Roberts University is an international school. It's probably got, I'll guess, 25% international students, a lot of them from Africa, many from Latin America. And our next door neighbor, when I was very young, invited my father to accompany him on a missions trip to Central America. And so we, no fooling, drove in a car from Tulsa to Managua one summer in 1974. I would not advise anyone to do that today, but we spent a month driving around all of these villages in Latin America and Mexico and all of the Central American countries. I am sure that affected me and influenced me and gave me some sense that there were other people out there besides Oklahomans. And I took another trip just with my parents on a vacation to Munich once and visited the Dachau prison camp, and that really, or concentration camp, and that really affected me as to the importance and the gravity of the things that we do internationally, and how the United States played a role in liberating Europe in World War II, and it just sort of imbued me with a sense of duty. And I think that those two experiences really impacted me and set me on my course.
Well, the commonalities do not cease. My father, after he graduated from University of Texas, and he had chosen to go to Colombia to write his dissertation. So this is the late 60s. He traveled by bus all the way through Central America down to Panama with his suitcase and a typewriter, because back then there were no laptops, and then boarded a plane from Panama into Colombia, because you can't cross the Darien Gap, at least not at that time.
Not with a
And
typewriter.
exactly. I just find that serendipitous, so to say. Um, quick digression here. Do you find the Foreign Service spends enough dedicated attention to recruiting from states like Oklahoma, the Midwest, farming communities?
Yeah, I don't really have a problem with it. There is this leftover phrase about us being pale, male, and Yale. I think the Yale piece of that dropped out, if not in the 80s after the reform, certainly in recent times. And I think you'll find plenty of people from the Midwest. I never really thought that we were elitist East Coast. Now, keep in mind, I know that a lot of people will talk about that. A lot of people that talk about that actually went to an institution on the East Coast, like me. So I know I went to George Washington University for my master's. But I found it to be, they were pretty good about doing that recruitment. I can't speak to how it's going now because it's just been so many changes, but I felt pretty comfortable with that. In fact, what I was seeing was the Ivy League folks were more interested in getting jobs at the White House, the National Security Council, do a couple of years there, and then move on. But the long-term folks, I felt was a pretty good mix.
Okay. Now, returning back to you, tell us about your first posting overseas.
That is interesting. I was living in Washington at the time. I decided to join the Foreign Service. I actually failed the test once in 95 while I was working there. A lot of us fail, so that's okay. You just got to figure out how to, pick yourself up and start over. So I worked for a while as a civil servant, and then I decided to take the test in 1998 because of some strange bureaucratics. I took the test and passed it and started in the Foreign Service 2 weeks later, which is extremely rare. Most people will wait 2 years. And one of your previous guests, Linda Tagliatella, had a lot to do with that in slotting me into an empty seat that was about to expire at the end of the fiscal year. I was then on Flag Day, which is that day in your early orientation class. You get a flag that represents the country you're going to, and I was told I was going to Monterrey, Mexico, which was fascinating because actually closer to my hometown in Tulsa than Washington, D.C., so I felt a little like I was returning home. In that job, new people coming into the business, it's a lot like any business. You got to go sort of pay your dues, and that is on the visa line for the generalists, at least. And so I spent 2 years interviewing Mexicans, and I got to know so much about the culture, about their way of life, and their way of thinking, and their values. And as well, I administered the guest worker program. I think that I tell people, processing 80,000 visa applications during those 2 years really changed my perspective on immigration, and that people weren't all trying to get out. They were trying to figure out ways to stay in their cultures and their societies, but also feed their families. I was really proud to have worked on the H-2A guest worker agricultural program. I thought that was a really good program, and I know it continues today.
From your experiences at that time, what comments would you have in the sense of the role that immigrants play in the agricultural industry in the United States?
Well, we can't do it without them. We need them increasingly. These are jobs. Even this was 25 years ago, 28 years ago. And I recall talking to farmers in North Carolina and in Georgia, and they said we put out ads. This was actually the requirement. You had to put out ads. I think they said we got, four Americans show up to do the job. And by the end of the day, we had one, and that person only worked a half a day the next day. The Mexicans were fantastic at working hard all day under some pretty grueling conditions. I think they knew that they could stay for the harvest season or whichever season they were working, and then make their way back to their village and have a pretty good nest egg to supplement them throughout the rest of the year. Sure, some of them didn't come back. And certainly there was fraud, and we worked to get that out. But we found during that time, and this is a very different era when the numbers going north were quite different than in recent years. But we found that generally folks, maybe a 8 or 6% stay rate. But when we checked in on people, we generally found that they had come back. Certainly, it's not a perfect science, but the State Department and those visa officers, it's their first assignment in the government. Typically, it's also they're our first line of defense, and they're making judgment calls about whether this person deserves to get into the United States. We did all of that, by the way, without a lot of computer help. Right? It was pre 9/11, and so all the databases weren't all hooked together. You got some computer checks of what had gone on, but you didn't have the kinds of things you had access to today. So, and in those days, the emphasis was on pushing as many people through as possible. We had a very different mentality prior to 9/11, as you may recall.
Did you serve on the consular line anywhere else?
No, in those days, you really had to do one visa tour. I think these days you might have to do two. I don't know what the current situation is. But I was sent to Bolivia, and because of my econ background, I was selected to be the economics officer at the post. It was such a small post in La Paz that I also did the duties of the commercial section, so working for the U.S. Department of Commerce as well. I also handled the agricultural section. So if there's anything having to do with economics, I was the chief person. So as a junior officer, I was working directly with the ambassador on a lot of very interesting projects. Always, Bolivia it's a small country from a population, and a lot of these countries are small towns. At the end of the day, everybody knows everyone. And so I was like living in that society. It was a pretty responsible job for being so new to the Foreign Service, and I really loved it. Let me add here, because I don't know if you'll follow up. But people may ask, yes, I was working for Ambassador Manuel Rocha, who many years later was uncovered and revealed to be a Cuban spy while I was working for him. I won't comment more on that, but did not realize that at the time. But it certainly changed my perspective of everything that happened in Bolivia.
Well, for even greater context, many FBI agents didn't realize that their peer, Robert Hansen, was a spy for the Russians. So that's just the way it plays out, unfortunately. During this time, as you're progressing up sort of the chain within the State Department, what are some of the lessons learned you took with you as you entered your first assignment as a deputy chief of mission?
Well, I think so. The deputy chief of mission is the hardest job in government, hardest job in the State Department. That's what we call it. You are the axle grease between the ambassador, often a lot of Washington offices, and your staff. The ambassador is working on the bilateral relationship. He or she owns the breadth and the depth of that. Within that, you have to make sure that the country team, that's the group of the section heads that advise the ambassador, is working toward his or her purpose and working on his or her agenda. So the first lesson that you have to take if you're going to do that job is that you're giving up the job that you used to have. Say I was a political officer. We have these different specialties in the tracks in the Foreign Service. I had to set that aside, and I wasn't the super political counselor. I was essentially the servant to all of them to make sure that they got what they needed to do their job. So you're a lot of times in the background, just ensuring that all of the machinery is running. It is 24/7. It is often emotionally difficult, just because you're dealing with not only your employees and maybe problem employees or folks that have challenges, But you also have to deal with their families, right? Because there may be issues in the home that we have certainly have an interest in. If there are problems in the home, it typically is it's our responsibility. It's also subject to federal jurisdiction in case there are, acts of violence or any improprieties in the home. So it can be a pretty stressful job, and you learn a lot about people that you wish you never knew. You just want to do your job. So I always tell DCM schools or candidates, make sure you understand that going in, that your job now is to serve all these people doing the job that you used to do.
Well, going from there, what further sort of insights would you share in terms of when you're interacting with, for lack of a better word, these subordinates, but they're actually senior level people because they're running their own office, right? The primary political officer, the general services officer, the regional security officer, the consular chief. So when you're sitting in that DCM chair, you're the person that evaluates them. What did you observe that made for effective individuals in those positions?
Maurice, you're looking for someone who brings you the solutions. You very quickly can tell when somebody is bringing you the problem and asking you to fix it. And you realize, wow, the more people that come to me with some solutions, they could be half-baked solutions, but that they haven't thought through, okay, how are you going to fix this problem? Then you're putting just enormous stress on your bosses, and you're saying, I'm just going to pass this up. And you can do that for a good part of your career, but then you do start to realize that when you're passing it up, someday you're going to sit in the seat where all of those things are landing, and you're going to have to deal with it. So it was common that I would say to people, it sounds like you have a problem, meaning I'm not going to get involved in this. You need to figure out how you're going to solve it as a senior officer who is responsible for making all of this work. The minute you ask me to get involved, I can do it, but then that's going to be your go-to move, is you're always going to come and ask for help. But at that level, and we're not doing this to folks, if you have someone who's relatively inexperienced, you do get in and you help walk them through it. But at this level, you're always talking about coaching, right? You're not going to go out and shoot the free throw for them, but you're going to help to coach them. I had a DAS once, a deputy assistant secretary, who gave me a piece of advice. Anytime anyone ran in and said that they needed his help or he had to do something, he said the first thing that he asked himself was, why is this my problem? And he didn't do it in a way, it wasn't lazy by any means. It was just, have you guys put enough thought into what the decision is before you come to me and just describe it all? So you're really looking for those people that put together solutions on your behalf so that you can just say yes or no.
So, as we transition now from overseeing relationships internally to a mission, now you're in the role of Deputy Assistant Secretary covering South America regional economic policy. Tell us about that, how trade and economic policy function as tools of influence, and then managing relationships or influencing relationships with other economies.
Yeah, I think when the further you go up in the State Department, the more you see the connectivity. First, you're working on a country, right? And maybe you even get a group of countries if you're in an office, and you can sort of see the interplay there. At some point then I was working on a whole continent of South America, and you could see that. But as a PDAS, I started to now see how the things that were happening in my region were affecting other regions. So I'll just go back. There was a brief moment for a few months where I was in charge of Haiti. Continued to be a problem all throughout. And the PDAS, by the way, really is the person who needs to take first responsibility for the safety of the staff in the security of your embassies, right, for the Bureau. So anytime there was a question of the safety of our folks down in Port-au-Prince, I would be involved either early as a DAS and then later as a PDAS. But you realize you're trying to go in to ask for help on Haiti, and really the fix there, it continues to be today, is they have a security crisis that you have to fix first. and then that will sort of get them through what is an ongoing political crisis of not having elected leadership in place. And then you can get to sort of the economic piece of helping them sort of reignite their economy. But we realize from the big meetings with the secretary that he's dealing with a Russian invasion of Ukraine. And then the White House, they're dealing as well. And then Gaza lights off. And so now you've got two big regional conflicts in which we're pretty involved. And you realize I'm not going to get any help for Haiti. I'm not going to get a military solution. Ultimately, we worked out a UN solution that continues to be worked out today. The new administration has now sort of adopted at least the style of the idea. They've got their own imprimatur on it, which seems to be moving towards some resolution. And I just raise all of those pieces sort of fit together. But to go to your main question, I feel like the economics is the deep current out in the middle of the river, and the political stuff is happening on the surface. And you could have rapids and little jetties and things at the top, but out in the middle of the river is where the economic interests are sort of driving things. It doesn't always move as fast. And so I used to say when I was an economics officer, rarely did I have to stay late and write that cable because Washington was waiting for a cable about, monetary policy in Bolivia. We did have a financial collapse and a near coup and all kinds of things. So occasionally they did, but for the most part, you can be a little more contemplative on the economics, and while the political is sort of the urgency of the day.
Would it be fair to say, I already have the answer in my mind, but to borrow from von Clausewitz, that war is simply diplomacy by other means? Isn't economics, trade relations, just diplomacy by other means?
It certainly can be. I mean, the purpose of economics is for businesses to maximize profit. So, you're always approaching it with what is going to help U.S. business. I mean, we have that mandate from the State Department, is we're always supposed to support U.S. business. But you do realize that a lot of things go into that maybe the business isn't clued into. You have questions like, let me go to one in Peru. They had long ago had issued some agrarian bonds. Probably when your dad was down in Colombia, the Peruvians had a military government, the socialist military government that was trying to do land reform, and they expropriated a bunch of land and then issued some bonds that were, to quote a president down there, essentially Confederate money. By the time we were on the scene there in the mid 2010s, but you had U.S. investment firms buying up these distressed funds and then requesting the full value with interest of what they were paid. And they turned around and packaged those into products that found their way into the teachers' pensions in maybe 25, 30 states. And so suddenly your ancient, interesting oddity of economics has suddenly become a major political issue for, let's say, 40 congressmen and some senators. A fascinating study. So you're leaning on a government that really has no money to go back in time and try to fix this problem. They have since resolved that issue through mediation, but every day you're trying to help that U.S. company work their way through it while understanding, you can't always lower the boom on them because you don't want to, completely wreck the government currently. I'll tell you one other story going back to Bolivia was the Bolivians, very famously, they don't have oil, they've got gas, and they've got they had a lot of it. And in the late 90s, they began to develop that. Some U.S. companies, you may remember a company called Enron was down there producing that gas. And the idea, a lot of oil companies got together, not Enron, but was to the liquefied natural gas, which you probably know well from Louisiana, was just coming online, right? There wasn't really a world market for it yet, a spot market, but so you had to get these long-term sales contracts. So we were able to this consortium was able to get a deal with an energy company in San Diego that was going to truck this pull this gas out, truck it by pipeline over the Andes, which would have been a major feat, to Chile, liquefy it, put it on refrigerated tankers, and send it up to Mexico, where it would be regassed, sent across into the San Diego power grid. Phenomenal idea. Really would be a major achievement of policy as well as engineering, right, to get all of that done. The thing that everybody kind of breezed over, this would be in 2003 and the years after, was that Bolivians were pretty upset about Chile and the fact that they did not have access to the sea. This goes back to 150 years. And we all just assumed, well, it's good business. They'll enjoy getting the revenue from this. Well, that wasn't the case. They, in fact, rebelled. The president, there was a big shooting out in the plaza during a protest. The president, had to escape via an ambulance to get out. Eventually, he fell out of power. But you realize that, holy cow, this economics, this economic project that seemed to make total sense from a business standpoint was just not achievable because the people, we thought they would go along with it because they would realize how much money they would get. But it's just a different mindset and a different culture. It was a big lesson for us, for me at least, of not everybody thinks the same or processes information the same, and it really ended up in disaster.
For us to understand better, I mean, what kind of role or how necessary role does the Foreign Service, through its diplomatic missions and relationships overseas, play in these business relationships? I mean, does a business really need, the U.S. Embassy for X country to help them land a deal? How does all that work?
The answer is in your question. You use the word relationship. And before any U.S. company decides to go there and have a transaction, businesses know this. They've got to build relationships because you don't just go down. If you're selling something, maybe. If you're buying something, maybe. But if you're investing or wanting to put a production facility in or buy some security there or buy some property there, you really have to understand the environment you're going into. It is riskier, but I think people get scared away from it by not understanding that you've got people at that embassy that have been talking to a minister, a trade minister all the time, or the finance minister, or chances are we sent that finance minister to 4 cities for an exchange program when he or she was in their 20s, right? And they have fond memories of the United States, or oftentimes in Latin America, those types of folks probably went to school in the United States. And we are constantly working on maintaining dozens, hundreds of cultural and political and economic ties with our outposts there. You'll see sometimes, we close an embassy, say in Venezuela, we've done it in Cuba, a few other places. Every time we do that, we've reopened obviously in both of those places now, but every time we do that, we cut ourselves off from those relationships, and it makes further relationship building impossible. So if you are a U.S. business trying to get overseas, look for some help, look for advice. You may not get any, but sometimes even just explaining what you're up to may trigger some things that you might not have understood. Sometimes you need a law change or regulatory change, and we can absolutely help with that. If you're trying to win a bid abroad, there's all kinds of assistance that the federal government can give you, both in Washington as well as overseas.
In your opinion, based on these different assignments you've had throughout the Western Hemisphere and then back at Maine State Department in these senior foreign service roles, do you believe that we as a country, so that encompasses our government, from municipal through federal businesses, that we have a tendency to overlook the value and benefits of relationships with member nations, with businesses located in the Western Hemisphere? Is our focus too much towards Europe, too much towards Asia, and there are just golden opportunities awaiting in the Western Hemisphere? Or are there no opportunities, and that is why we're looking at Europe and looking to Asia?
I probably when I was in the role, I would have come in with a full-throated cheer for Latin America and the Caribbean. Now that I'm working in a state trying to attract foreign direct investment, I have to look at, well, what are the countries that really are investing abroad? And you're going to find those today in Europe and Asia. There are significant pockets of money in Latin America. I wouldn't say it's generalized to the entire region. Now, that said, if you're going the other way, where you are a U.S. company looking to invest abroad, there are a lot of opportunities. There might be slightly higher risk just from the regulatory and legal standpoint. We see this right now, for example, in Venezuela, with the administration trying to convince oil companies to go back into Venezuela. They're going to go back. We already see some of those deals being signed, but they're very wary, knowing that this country has already nationalized their petroleum industry twice in their history. So they'll be very, very cautious on how they do that. And in a lot of countries, that is certainly the case. But that said, there's a lot of natural resources there. If you're looking in the agricultural sector, there are a lot of opportunities. Our trade agreements still exist. And in Colombia or Peru, I was always impressed about folks that figured out the off cycle for agricultural products, so that such that, you know, if you go to Walmart today, and it's the off season, there's a very good chance you're going to buy a blueberry that was grown in Peru or Colombia, or you'll get an avocado out of Colombia when others are out of season. So that hasn't put a single farmer out of work in those other countries because they weren't growing it. So there were some really interesting opportunities in those areas. And, you know, remember, they have to eat too. They do produce a lot, but to have like a really significant poultry industry, for example, in Peru, which that's the chicken eating, you know, capital of South America, you know, they had to import a lot of our soy to feed their chickens, as well as they would buy, you know, poultry from the United States just because of their value. So there are opportunities. I think it's a little more select. Let me finish that by just talking about the future here. There are some technological pockets that are very interesting. Mexico, Medellin, Argentina, Buenos Aires, Cordoba, they've got entrepreneur technology startups, unicorns that could be very, very interesting and might have a future in the United States. There's even folks here in Oklahoma who are recruiting Latin Americans to Tulsa, and we've got 5 new Latin American startups that work here presently, because you can't raise your first round of venture capital down there. You might be able to get some seed money or talk to your friends or bootstrap it, but to get that next level, Oklahoma just turns out to be a great place. And so we have what we call a landing pad program here to help those Latin Americans come in. So it's a range, and you know, it is an extremely important region for us strategically, as well as economically, as we're already seeing with things like drugs, immigration, right?
Well, now that we've been talking about your activities working at the state level, tell us about this, you know, global to local impact. You know, what are some of the differences you've encountered as you transitioned from State Department now to the Department of Commerce from Oklahoma, and what Oklahoma is trying to do? They're effectively engaging in, I guess, what we would call subnational diplomacy, or am I wrong?
I mean, that's certainly the idea. And I think that was their concept in hiring me, having 30 years of experience in diplomacy, was to take another look at how they were you know, addressing the world, and then looking at what are the trends and where do we need to really spend our very precious capital and resources that we've got. The differences between the federal and state level are a lot, but there's some similarities too. There's a bureaucracy in all of these places, right? And they have a slightly different nature to them, but I think the laws of bureaucracy apply, and having a lot of knowledge at the federal level has been helpful, and it translates into the state level. Also, the people that you're working with, it's the same group. They want to be public servants. They love to help people. I felt like I wasn't quite done yet serving, and I was just very gratified and grateful to be given this opportunity to continue to be a public servant. There's still politics in just like in Washington. We have politics here. They're very different, and they are probably less intense. If Washington is always at an 11 on politics, and I think they're probably at about a 3 here. I sleep through the night, let's just say. And then, like any foreign service officer, they parachute you into some post, and you have to sort of figure out who all the players are, how do they interact, and what's sort of the rules of the game, and understanding what we like to use the phrase here is ecosystem, right? And there is a vast ecosystem of economic development that I ignored pretty much as a foreign service officer, failed to understand. And it really is the last mile in all of that talk that we do abroad about helping U.S. companies. But, we're talking about how do we find that company, recruit them, and get them to an industrial site in the United States that has all the things that they need, close to rail, close to water, close to their market. And I really, that part of it was always a missing part. And so I'm thrilled to be able to do that. The difference is that I see, some things are faster, some things are slower. In the states just don't generate as much income. They don't run massive, at least Oklahoma does not run massive deficits. We're pretty fiscally conservative here. In fact, I think we spend less money on our resources for things like this because our big selling point is we're the lowest cost state for doing business in America presently. We do have a lot of power, although we're all facing the squeeze from the data center dilemma. And there is, I don't want to say there's like less awareness of the foreign environment because there are a lot of very savvy folks. Like I said, Tulsa was once the capital of the world oil industries. A lot of that's moved to Houston now. But in both Oklahoma City and in Tulsa, there are some very savvy business folks who are doing work all around the world. There's small town machine shops that buy product from China and sell their finished products in Europe or in Africa, and there is a whole system set up to help do that. Let me finish. The last thing is that kind of surprised me because your listeners might attribute a certain mindset to Oklahoma, but when I came up here came down here to look at, do I have the possibility of creating a new life, starting a new life here last year when I was thinking this through, I found all of the businesses, the foreigners I met, remarking just how open and welcoming Oklahomans were. No one ever felt like they were the outsider, and that really spoke to me. And it has borne out every day. There are a lot of Oklahomans here who are very open to international work. We do have a lot of work to do, though, to get people to understand that when you are open to foreign markets, you vastly increase your sales base, potential client base by 96%, right? Because we're such a small portion of the market. So we have to really do a lot of work to convince people to invest the time to be exporters or to look for foreign investment partners. And we have a lot of great foreign investment in the state already. Happy to talk about some of those and how that figures into the geopolitics. But, on the coast, we tend to refer to this part of the country as the flyover part. And it is a shame because it really isn't. There's quite a bit of savvy, politically aware folks here that are making some real advances for the economy and creating jobs for Oklahomans.
Well, before we explore what you alluded to, the foreign direct investment in Oklahoma, briefly, what suggestions or observations would you share with municipal or state level entities that either have a similar type office as yours, or they would like to develop one? Now, what makes for an effective team in that sense, and pitfalls they should consider to avoid?
One thing I've learned is that this concept of economic development in the United States, it is a whole subculture, and it requires a lot of education and background. There are certifications that you can get in economic development. I'm taking one right now in a course in FDI. Just you would think I would know it all, but I actually didn't know the details. And you do have to develop a team. You do have to have top cover for activities like this. Like in any business, like this is essentially the business development arm of the government, right? And so we have a governor who is just, he calls it the world to Oklahoma and Oklahoma to the world. He has a real vision for investment in Oklahoma, and he's willing to drop everything and fly to Dubai or to Korea or Japan whenever he is needed to help close a deal. And so you need that top cover, obviously, but you also need that skill set beneath. And then you need to have some savvy for the diplomacy and the protocol pieces of it, that you're dealing with a different culture. That is not a magic esoteric thing. It starts with just learning some basic courtesies and how cross-cultural communication works. But you have to be sensitive to that. You can't, humor, for example, never translates, and it's very hard to do that. But I will say, just personal touches. Our governor, will gift people a cowboy hat, or we'll take a famous barbecue sauce and give it to foreigners. It is there's a lot of touches that you can do, and so you need to sort of have all those pieces. I don't at all want to suggest, though, that a state is like paternalistic to these cities and towns that develop, that actually do the economic development work. What we do is, we will help attract them, but we have to ultimately work in partnership with a lot of different groups. None of us has all the resources or the authorities to like land one of these deals. So we'll work with a chamber of commerce. Often there's some sort of authority, like maybe a port authority or an airport authority. And then the city or the town itself may have an economic development expert. Often there's a private entity in the middle of that, a site selector. That's somebody who's just an expert on helping foreign companies relocate to the States. And that's a whole sub industry. So yeah, it's not an easy thing to get into. The other part of it, it's a little like our electoral college. It's not we don't have like one entity that manages all of this. It's hundreds of maybe thousands of entities in the United States. They're all trying to attract different types of business, and we're all playing to our comparative strengths as to what kind of business we can attract and what makes sense for our communities and our state.
Do you have a particular example in mind when it comes to Oklahoma that you'd like to share with us?
Let me share two. One is, last year, our governor signed an MOU with the Emiratis Global Aluminum Company, which is it's in Dubai, and the idea, as part of the America First Industrial policy, was to start producing aluminum in the United States. This is Oklahoma working this, and this is a bipartisan policy. So I didn't mean to invoke one particular administration here, because they've been working on it for a while, but it all came to fruition last year. And the Emirates understood that we're moving into a different phase of how the world looks at open markets and tariffs, and they understood it was probably a good idea to start producing more in the United States, and they could make a good business out of it. So they're willing to put quite a bit of money. It's a $4 billion investment. We happen to have geography is everything, right? So we happen to have a waterway that's 442 miles inland from the Gulf, that works its way all the way up to just outside of Tulsa. And we had some visionaries who figured out we needed to have some industrial sites around that, and so we've got those ready, and we will be moving forward soon. And it's not just a new aluminum smelter, but it's also a cluster industry all around that. So you can move your aluminum, whatever production facility, an extruder, aluminum products. You can move it right next to the smelter and take the offtake, literally the hot molten aluminum right off of the assembly or the production line. And so we've got thousands of new jobs. And while we're going to need a lot of engineers and experts, we also just need a lot of workers who have like a vo-tech degree or career tech degree. And we're working on that as well. There's a whole workforce subculture that sort of works around that as well. So, we do feel like we're a geopolitical entity in making America successful. The other one was just found out, just recently is USA Rare Earths is a magnet company. Obviously, that's an extremely important industry for the United States right now because it has geostrategic implications for China and its sort of stranglehold on the magnet market, which we need for semiconductors. And just yesterday, we had a company announce it here in Stillwater, Oklahoma, that it was starting to take orders for production line of magnets. And USA Rare Earths, which is it's not just in Stillwater, that's where the production facility is, but they'll be we'll be part of that production chain of producing from critical minerals, a very valuable component both for military and for just industry in general, every kind of magnet that you can imagine. So, I mean, those are two ways in which Oklahoma is playing its part. Now, I always say in the States, you're not policy makers, you're policy takers. So, whatever policies come out of Washington, the states will figure out how they can play in that and how they can succeed.
Going to the Emirates Global Aluminum Smeltering Project there in Oklahoma, how long is this going to take to come to fruition? And what other states does this benefit in the area?
I mean, that's a good question. There's a lot of variables here. So, typically building something like this is a massive undertaking. The pot lines of a smelter can be over a mile long. And so it sort of all depends on a lot of different variables. Obviously, there's a competition for power right now. We have data centers going in everywhere. Every state is dealing with that. That has power implications. And so every state is dealing with that. And then you also have questions about tariffs because there are tariffs on aluminum and steel right now at about 50%. It makes a lot of sense to relocate to the United States under those conditions, but every one of those variables changes how the economics work. But the idea would be that you could bring in your bauxite, process it somewhere down in the Gulf, probably Louisiana, and then you would kind of truck it up or float it up the canals to Tulsa. So that's the general idea. There could be investments all along the way. It's hard to say. Obviously, we'll need to keep that canal working and realize whenever you move something a lot in one direction, you may create a backhaul issue for what do you do with the empty, in this case, barges or empty, rail cars or whatever it is you're dealing with. So it creates opportunity for the outgoing stuff as well, because they'll have lower transportation costs. So, it's going to be a number of years in the construction. And I don't want to give too many details because I'm really not in charge of this. Those are the companies that are doing it. But, we're here to help, and we think it's a great move. And it's really a lot of jobs for people in Oklahoma. So it'll not only help on revenues and taxes and things like that, but it will help with really good long-term jobs for Americans.
And out of curiosity, What do you think was the catalyst for attracting Emirates Global Aluminum to Oklahoma, as opposed to Texas, Louisiana, Kansas? Again, why Oklahoma? Did Oklahoma was Oklahoma competing with others, or was Oklahoma a natural fit? Did the Emiratis come to Oklahoma, or so on and so forth?
So I wasn't around for all of this. So I'll just, just speaking in more generalities, um, when a company is wanting to do something like this, they'll hire, like I said, a site selector, and they'll start to look at all of the candidates. And there, no fooling, there's like Zillows for this, where you just kind of go on and start narrowing it down and looking for things. And then you're not only looking for the geography to make sense, but you're also looking for the about 10 other factors, or maybe it's 20 other factors of what kind of incentives that a state or a municipality could offer. You want to attract business, but you also don't want to be left with a big hole in your budget, right? So you want it to be to ultimately contribute to the development and growth of your community. There's regulatory issues, environmental. All I can say really is that Oklahoma did compete against 22 states and territories in Canada, and ultimately was the winner. I would guess the one of the great things about that canal system, which by the way was an investment, started in the 40s, and probably not really. It was President Nixon who inaugurated it, but that creates ultra cheap transportation that you can just float right up to your facility. It is a lot cheaper than rail or truck, and so a lot of people, we use it for agriculture mostly, and we do bring steel in from Arkansas and Pennsylvania. We can get it pretty much all the way up, anything up to Canada. So having that, I think, was probably the clincher. The other thing you have to ask yourself is, like, if I'm going to send people to work there from abroad, or I need to attract high paid engineers, do I have the housing available? What kind of city is it? And you have some philanthropies here who are working very hard to increase the sort of livability of Tulsa, as well as Oklahoma City. And I'm definitely not trying to say we're at all better than other states. Everyone just has a different set of criteria that they offer. We do feel like we're getting a lot of people coming into Oklahoma that say that Texas is sort of running out of some of the opportunities that had attracted folks there originally. And so they're starting to look at Southern Oklahoma just being like a quick, truck ride or rail away from Dallas, let's say. So we'll benefit in Southern Oklahoma from that sentiment in Texas, just as, costs will go up over time if investments are starting to sort of reach their maximum in Texas. We'll get more in Oklahoma. And we're seeing some of that right now.
What would you see as a path forward for any, again, municipal, state level entity that's focused on developing these types of relationships to either support existing industries and economies or diversify? How should they make the decisions and what directions to go in when they're formulating their plan? Where should they get their information from? Should it be because the director of the office or the governor of a state, says, I think yes, or we need to focus on X country or what have you? Or is it more of a collaborative process that's going to make much more sense when it comes to making the decisions and allocating the taxpayer resources?
I mean, in that, I am very glad that I got to attend the National War College 12 years ago to learn about the idea of strategy and how you formulate it and how you implement it. So when I was a DCM, you are typically in charge, the senior most officer in charge of formulating and implementing the integrated country strategy, where you push the sections to come up with what are your real goals here and what are we trying to accomplish. And when you make a strategy, you sort of create a cone. And if it's inside that cone and we have an activity, and you're weighing that later against an activity that's outside the cone, you have your answer, right? And so it will tend to deflect a lot of sentiments of, hey, I've got a good idea. And so that is a process. We were actually mandated by the legislature to produce a strategic plan, which we're about to drop here, that will outline some of our most lucrative or potential sectors. I really don't want to go into it because I would prejudice some people that are still supposed to make a decision on it. But I will say that it's very common. For example, our aviation, defense, and space industries are really taking off here. We've got 1,200 aviation and defense companies in Oklahoma. We've got the largest maintenance, repair, and overhaul facilities in Oklahoma City and Tulsa, both military and civilian, in the world. And so in a strategic process, you would say that is our comparative advantage. That's the kind of stuff we're going to get. Can we make airplanes? Well, maybe they do that up in Wichita or in Seattle, but what we can do is repair and overhaul them very, very well, and we've got the infrastructure to do that. So you kind of want to like take stock of everything that you've got and then play to your strengths, right? And then figure out what do we need, where do we need to put our resources? Well, it's into those areas. Space is the other one that's just got all kinds of potential. For example, we just broke ground in Tulsa on a new in-space propulsion testing lab that companies can now come and test their satellite rockets, which are small propulsion, but you have to start moving satellites around in space these days. So we're really on the cutting edge. I met somebody yesterday who's working on the next generation of spacesuit that sort of launched out of one of our universities, which are other incredibly important strategic partners that form one of those assets that I was talking about. So when you compile all of that, you've got a plan. Now, the next step is telling people about your plan, because 50% of strategy is saying that you have a plan, right? Because then people will start to look to you for the leadership and the guidance, and then they won't make up their own solutions, right? And so once you get a strategy, you've got to communicate that out to others within your constellation of effort, and make sure that we're all sort of moving along the same lines. It's not 100%, and obviously the world changes and strategies have to morph, but it is a great starting point when you're trying to move an economy that's already going to move on its own, but how can you shape it in a way that really leads to more sustainable growth and, at the end of the day, better jobs for Oklahomans.
Briefly, what comes to mind when you think of mistakes made in developing strategies?
I think probably one of the biggest is just making the strategy and putting it on the shelf and not setting up a structure. So when I was DCM in Lima, for example, after we came up with our, 4 pillars of lines of action, I instituted a monthly meeting where we would go over one of the pillars. So we call that the pillar meeting. So we could say, hey, we said we were going to do this. Let's go through it one of them once a month, just so that there's a check-in, so that everybody knows that it wasn't just an exercise, but that we are very serious about doing it. So I think that's your probably number one problem. I guess the other one would just be assuming that you're going to get resources. That's always a problem for any state. We're all sort of running around, sort of not begging for money, but we're looking for different sources. And so you do have to spend a lot of time socializing, because you could bring on a lot of partners who are willing to contribute in the areas that benefit them. So, if you're working on the aviation stuff, you've got an alliance, like there's a defense, industry alliance here that would be helpful and would partner with you on implementing your strategy.
Well, with that in mind, and availability of resources to support the strategy, I'm going to give you a one question test right here. And that is, what would you recommend to a place like New Orleans that has lost almost half its population since Hurricane Katrina 20 years ago. There's a bit of a brain drain. There are infrastructure challenges here, and the local government is facing hundreds of $1 millions in debt. And what would you recommend to a place like that to try to attract foreign direct investment? It's a loaded question, but
It really is, and for a guy that's been doing this line of work for only 6 months, it's a lot of hubris. So my apologies to everyone in New Orleans for any ideas that just don't track. But you start with your with geography and your assets. You've got some great port potential there. One thing we realize is if we try to swing for the fence every time, we're going to be disappointed. And so we're trying to develop a process, much like the world champion OKC Thunder, NBA champs, that just leads us gradually toward success. And then, when we get that big investment possibility, that we're able to surge. So we might not look for that, giant car, that giant Toyota factory, but we might say, hey, what kind of producers or suppliers might go into that Toyota factory? We're probably not going to get a semiconductor plant, at least not today. We know where those are being built as a result of the CHIPS Act, but we certainly can play a role in the testing and packaging assembly side of things, or electronic components. And so why don't we think about that? Because, hey, we've got great rail systems and great interstate systems, and this canal I can't stop talking about. So why don't we, and we're also right in the middle of the country. So let's just play to our strengths, and as we say, we'll hit doubles and singles all day long. And then we're ready for that big swing when we need to do it. So, but it's just that overthinking it, that there's one one company or one big investment is going to put you back into the black. That's dangerous thinking. You need to build the process first, and then let the successes roll in. You need top cover in the meantime that people don't get impatient and rewrite your legislation and completely change your plan. So that's a very humble take to, I know, was a pretty serious problem for a city facing a lot of debt.
in terms of assets, resources, what is a society's, what is a city's, a state's greatest resource?
Ooh, well, obviously, people, right? You have to start with the people. We're facing challenges in that we have slid to 50th in literacy and third grade scores, and that's something that's going to turn companies off. So our legislature is meeting now to try to change the playing field there. Listeners could look up the Mississippi Miracle to see how Mississippi is moved above New England in some cases in their reading scores, and that will make companies start to pay attention. Now, that said, we have some tremendous workforce opportunities. High school students in Oklahoma can actually switch over to another program and get their pilot's license or their aviation mechanics license, and go into these very lucrative lines of work that may just need a technical certification and not a college degree. But you have to start with your people. The state government, can offer different types of incentives and tax packages. We have pretty much, we don't have anything fancy. We just have the real basics. If you bring jobs here and pay people well, we'll give you a little bit of a refund on your taxes. And some of that comes even at the end or later once you've proved that you're doing it, right? So we just say, hey, we've got great conditions to work here. Somebody else might offer you, to build you the building or something like that. That's pretty rare that you're going to find. And lastly, the federal government does a lot in this space. They do a lot in export promotion, but they will help rebuild small town communities, all kinds of programs for that. If you're looking for any type of assistance, if you're a small business owner, there is somebody who is willing to help you. We've got all kinds of folks, both at the state, local, and federal level, or state officials who have a federal grant, who will advise a business on how to do almost anything. And people just don't know that those things are available. But there are many resources that we've made available over time. To the building I'm sitting in is actually from a federal grant from the Economic Development Agency to create tech hubs around the country. And so we're working in all kinds of things in Tulsa. I didn't mention drones, but that's a huge growth area here because the tribal lands have been making their lands available for autonomous drone development. So there's all kinds of fascinating things happening out in the countryside. You occasionally will be walking around and you'll hear a little buzz overhead.
You had mentioned a couple of times some minutes ago the importance of developing a process that leads gradually to success. So, with that in mind, and as we're coming to a close here, and for our listeners, regardless at what stage they're at in their own careers or lives, but especially for young people, how would you define effective leadership and decision making?
I mean, in the vein that you've primed me here for that question is what I would say is just no zigzagging. There are moments when a leader can predict the future. Those of us who have been doing it a long time, this is a Malcolm Gladwell idea, but this idea that we can sort of tell how this is going to come out, right? But if you have a plan, you might think about 5 degrees variation, standard deviation off of that plan. But if you're sticking to the plan and the thing that you have thought through as to, these are our goals. And if you're going to change those goals, think it through again and make sure that you weigh all of the costs, right? And then whatever those costs are, you cycle it back through to your strategy. So, but if you zigzag and somebody comes in and I'll do this if you're getting a visit together, say, the secretary is coming to visit your post or whatever, and suddenly these are the things that you want to do, but suddenly somebody has this other idea. As a leader, you've got a big tail. So if you're every day, every meeting, you're zigzagging one to the other, it is whipping your staff around to where they will just say, you know what, I'll just wait here until you settle and figure it out. But if you're communicating, if you know, oh geez, I'm going to go in and talk to Mark again. He's going to be on about this one thing, and I'll have a list for that person as to what the priority is. That is predictability, and that helps the organization. I think that leads to healthy outcomes. When you're moving with the wind or changing your idea every day or every other day, it just builds frustration, and people will fold their hands and say, you know what, I'll let you handle all of this because I'm not really sure if I do this, you're going to support me in the end.
Is there any last remaining thought you would like to share with listeners?
I'll just say, for folks that are making that transition out of government, in my case, it was the Foreign Service, and I was entering into what I thought would be, I frankly thought it would be the private sector. I sort of have one foot in the private sector, and then I'm working much more closely with business than I ever have before. But you have to develop that narrative, that quick elevator pitch. And I had to think through, like, what does a foreign service officer mean to somebody? So I just told people, hey, we're problem solvers, we're networkers, we're communicators, we're analysts, and we're strategists. And I could tick off a point or two about each of those anytime I got into contact with somebody that might be sort of my next opportunity. And I thought that was a great way to be ready to talk about yourself and brand yourself if you are needing to make one of these transitions. So the Foreign Service is very foreign to folks, working here in America, and just being able to throw out very quickly, well, what value add do you have for me? I found that to be enormously helpful. I hope that's helpful for your listeners.
It is. Mark, thank you. Thank you tremendously for sharing your experiences and your thoughts, observations. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on Brungart Law's Lanyap, where we provide a little extra perspective because the devil is always in the details. And please invite others to listen. Let me know what you think via the link. Mark, again, tremendous gratitude.
Thank you, Maurice. It's been a real pleasure to get to go over these things. Congratulations on the podcast. It's a great idea. Hope that really looking forward to a lot more episodes.
Appreciate that.